Tonight, we step into the cold, reed-scented morning of a 1930s ELY Fen Drain Gauger, just as the first pale light touches the water. There is no hurry here, only the slow measuring of levels, the soft breath of the fen, and the steady work of keeping watch. You feel the damp before you see much of anything. It rests on your coat sleeves, beads along the brim of your cap, and settles into the wool at your wrists. The path beside the drain is dark and narrow, pressed between black earth and still water, and somewhere beyond the bank a cart horse shifts in its traces with a quiet clink of metal. We are in the low country around Ely, where the cathedral rises like a ship above the flat fields, and where a drain gauger in the 1930s begins his day with a notebook, a rule, a pencil, and a pair of boots already whitened at the seams with dried silt. You walk with him now, not quickly, because the ground teaches slowness. The fen does not like rushed feet. The air smells of wet peat, cold grass, and the faint mineral tang of standing water. In winter there may be a little coal smoke from a cottage chimney, carried low across the fields before the wind takes it apart. In summer there may be cut hay, warm mud, and the green bitterness of reeds crushed underfoot. But in every season the drain is there, long and straight, holding the reflected sky like a strip of dull tin. Your first task is simply to look. That sounds small, but it isn't. A drain gauger looks with trained patience, noticing whether water presses high against the bank, whether the flow at a sluice is smooth, whether a weed raft has gathered near a culvert, whether yesterday's rain is still finding its way from furrow to ditch to main drain. You don't command the fen, you listen to it. The measuring staff stands at the water's edge, marked in inches and feet, stained by weather and touched again and again by careful hands. You bend toward it, steadying yourself with one boot against the slippery bank. The water moves just enough to blur the line, and so you wait for the ripple to settle. A gull cries somewhere far off, thin and pale in the morning air. Then you read the level. You hold the number in your mind, and you open the notebook. The paper is soft at the corners from damp fingers, and the pencil leaves a grey line that looks modest, almost shy. Yet this small mark belongs to a whole working landscape. It matters to the man with potatoes in the ground, to the woman airing sheets in a cottage near the drove, to the engine man watching the pump, and to every ditch that must carry its little share away. In the 1930s, ELY Fen still carried the memory of older water. The land had been drained and redrained for centuries, shaped by cuts, banks, sluices, wind pumps, steam engines, and the slow argument between rain and gravity. You can feel that history under your boots. The earth is not firm in the way upland earth is firm. It has been made usable by labor, and it asks for labor in return. So the gauger walks. He may have a bicycle waiting against a gate, its tires dark with mud and its lamp turned sideways from the morning jolt. He may carry a leather satchel, a folded map, a pocket watch, and perhaps a small tin of lunch wrapped in paper. His route is not dramatic. It is a chain of ordinary places, each with its own mark, its own habit, its own little question asked by the water. At the first bridge, you pause and lean over the parapet. The stone or brick is cold through your glove. Below, the drain slides under the arch with a soft pressing sound, and bits of straw turn slowly in an eddy. You note the color. Clear brown water is one thing. Thick cloudy water after heavy rain is another. A smell of rot, oil, or disturbed silt may tell you something before the measure does. A drain gauger near Ely in the 1930s was part observer, part messenger, part humble clerk of the water. He did not simply wander and admire the reeds, though there was plenty to notice if he had the mind for it. He measured levels at set points. He watched sluices and outfalls. He reported blockages, breaches, bank slips, and unusual flows to the drainage board or the men responsible for maintenance. You can imagine the quiet authority of such a routine. No one stops in the lane to cheer a man reading a gauge board. No child grows up dreaming of damp notebooks and cold bridges. Yet the work holds the fields in balance, and balance is often made from tasks so plain that they nearly disappear. The morning widens, and the fen begins to show itself in layers. First, there is the silver of water, then the black of turned soil, then the low green of winter wheat, or the paler stubble after harvest. Farther away, a line of pollarded willows leans along a ditch, each tree thick-headed and patient, with fine twigs lifting into the grey light. You know your way by such things. At another gauge, the board is fixed beside a small timber sluice. The wood smells damp and tarred, and the ironwork has the reddish bloom of age. You crouch again, careful with your knees, and the mud gives a little under you. There is a soft sucking sound when you shift your boot. You wait. You read. You write. The figures are plain, but the conditions around them are alive. Last night's rain may have lifted the water an inch or two. A hard frost may slow the run from field drains. A wind from the east may hold water back in ways that a tidy office map cannot quite explain. The gauger learns these things without making a show of them. He carries the fen in his body as much as in his records. By now your hands know the little motions. Thumb the notebook open. Keep the pencil dry. Check the mark. Look once more. Write the place, the time, the level, and any note that might be useful later. Repetition steadies the morning. It gives each stretch of drain a place in the order of the day. There is comfort in that, especially before the roads are busy. A milk cart may pass, wheels creaking softly, and the driver may lift 2 fingers from the reins. A boy on a bicycle may rattle over the bridge with a school bag thumping against his side. Somewhere a dog barks, then thinks better of it. The fen accepts these sounds without echo. Open country lets noise travel, but it also thins it gently, and as the morning wears on, we follow the ELY Fen Drain Gauger from the first readings near the village edges toward the longer reaches, where the land feels wider and the water seems to run beside you for miles. The farther you go, the more the work becomes a rhythm of distance. There are no high hedges to hide the weather from you. The wind comes across the flat land with honest hands, touching your cheeks, lifting the edge of your coat, and making the reed heads whisper like dry paper. You lower your chin and keep walking. The main drain lies straight ahead, cut with human purpose through a country that once held marsh, mere, and slow flood. In the 1930s around Ely, the older stories were still close enough to be spoken of by grandparents. Men remembered places where water had stood longer in winter. Families knew which fields were reliable and which were always a little uncertain. A gauger heard those memories while doing work that depended on exactness. At a lonely measuring point, the gauge board stands beside a narrow footbridge. You step onto the planks and feel them flex under your weight. The boards are slick with dew, and the rail is smooth where hands have passed for years. Below you, the water has a slow brown pull. It carries tiny flecks of peat and the occasional pale stem of reed, moving as if it has no wish to arrive quickly. You read the level from above this time. The angle is awkward, so you lean carefully, with one hand on the rail and one foot braced. The mark is just below yesterday's figure, perhaps by a small enough amount that another man might shrug, but you write it down. Small changes, kept day after day, become the memory of the drainage system. The notebook is not fancy. It may be ruled paper in a stiff cover, darkened by rain at the edges. The entries are brief, and the hand may be neat or cramped depending on the cold. Yet those pages hold the day's speech between land and water. They show whether the pumps are keeping up, whether a sluice is doing its work, whether a stretch of drain is becoming sluggish under weed and silt. Sometimes you pause to sharpen the pencil with a pocket knife. The curled shaving falls into the grass, pale against the dark mud. The graphite point is never perfect for long, because damp paper blunts it and cold fingers press too hard. You tuck the knife away, close the notebook under your palm, and stand for a moment with the smell of wet timber and grass rising around you. There may be a pumping station somewhere along the route, low and practical, with brick walls, an iron roof, and the smell of oil in the doorway. In earlier decades, steam engines had worked many fen drains, and by the 1930s, some places were using diesel or electric pumps, though older machinery and older habits still lingered. You don't need to make a ceremony of it. You know the sound of a pump when you hear one. It comes through the morning as a steady mechanical pulse. Not loud at this distance, just present. The engine house has its own warmth, its own smell of grease, iron, damp brick, and cooling metal. If you step inside, The air changes at once. The fen wind drops away behind the door, and the sound becomes fuller, rounder, more bodily. The engine man may be there, with a rag in his hand and a cap pushed back from his forehead. He knows you by sight. You compare notes quietly, because workmen do not need many words when the facts are simple. The water is up here. It is down there. The weed is catching near the culvert. The east bank is soft after the rain. A drain gauger's report might lead to men being sent with hooks, spades, barrows, or a small dredging crew. It might mean a sluice needs attention. It might mean nothing more than watching the same place again tomorrow. Much of the work is like that. It does not hurry toward an event. It prevents events by paying attention before they gather weight. You step back outside, and the cold air touches the oil smell on your coat. The fields open again. Your ears take a moment to adjust after the engine, and then you hear the quieter things returning. Water against wood, a crow crossing overhead, a gate chain tapping faintly in the wind. The world has not paused while you were indoors. It has simply continued at its proper speed. There is a great deal of walking in this occupation. Even with a bicycle, there are stretches where wheels are more trouble than help. The bank may be too narrow, the track may be rutted, a bridge may be easier reached on foot than by any road. So you walk, and the body settles into it, step after step along the drain. Your boots gather the country, wet clay under the arch, dry dust on a drove road, peat crumbs from a newly cut bank, grass seeds in the laces during summer, frost white on the toe caps in January. Every season leaves a little mark, and the gauger carries them from gauge to gauge without thinking much of it. By late morning, there is usually hunger, nothing grand, just the small, ordinary hunger that comes from cold air and steady movement. You may stop near a sheltered bank, out of the worst of the wind, and unwrap bread, cheese, or a slice of cold meat. The paper crackles softly. The food tastes of salt, cloth, and pocket warmth. Tea from a flask, if you have it, feels almost luxurious. You look out across the ELY Fen while you eat. The cathedral may be visible if the light is right, far off and raised above the town, its towers softened by mist. It has watched different kinds of labor for a very long time. Monks, farmers, boatmen, diggers, engineers, clerks, and now you, a drain gauger with crumbs on your glove and water levels in your book. There is no need to make the thought grand. The fen itself keeps things modest. It reminds you that land can be made, but not finally conquered. It asks for watchfulness, and it rewards regular care. That is enough for a morning's philosophy, especially when the wind is searching for the gap between collar and scarf. By midday, the work has changed only slightly, yet the light has shifted, and we go on with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger into the practical middle hours, when readings become reports and quiet observations begin to find their proper place. The middle of the day brings more people into the landscape. You meet a farmer at a field gate, one boot on the lower rail, his hands rough and red from work. He wants to know what the water is doing. He may not ask in those words. He may say the lower acres are still wet, or that the ditch by his turnips is slow, or that he saw water backing near the road culvert. You listen because local eyes matter. A drain gauger has his official points and his regular route, but the fen has more corners than any one notebook can hold. A farmer notices the sour smell of water sitting too long in a furrow. A laborer notices where a bank has slumped after cattle passed. A child notices a plank gone loose on a footbridge because children notice paths close to the ground. The conversation is plain and useful. You might say you'll mark it down. You might promise to take a look. The farmer nods, and both of you turn your heads toward the same invisible concern, somewhere beyond the hedge or ditch, where water is doing something it ought not do. Then the man goes back to his field, and you go back to the drain. In the 1930s, drainage around Ely was not only machinery and boards. It was a social arrangement as well, made from rates, maintenance crews, local knowledge and long memory. Drainage boards had responsibilities. Landowners had concerns. Laborers had spades in their hands. The gauger stood somewhere between office and mud, carrying facts from one world to the other. At a small office or depot, perhaps later in the day, those facts become tidier. You may sit at a wooden desk with a ledger open before you. The room smells of paper, damp coats, ink, coal dust, and old floorboards warmed unevenly by a small fire. A wall map shows drains in straight or bending lines, each one named and known. The map is clean, but your boots are not. You copy readings carefully. A smudged figure can cause confusion, so you take your time. The pen may scratch a little. The ink may shine for a moment before it dulls. Outside, a cart passes, and the window trembles faintly in its frame. Inside, the day becomes columns, places, times, and notes. This is still the same work, though the posture has changed. In the morning, you bent over water. Now you bend over paper. The hand that held the measuring book now steadies a ledger page, and the same patience applies. Accuracy is a quiet virtue. It does not draw attention to itself, but every practical system depends on it. You may report that weed is heavy near a certain sluice. Weed cutting was steady labor in fen drains, because water slowed where growth thickened. Men might use long-handled hooks, scythes, rakes, or boats in wider channels. The cut weeds came out wet and heavy, smelling green, muddy, and faintly stale, and they lay on the bank in dark heaps until they drained. You know the smell well. It clings to summer work. Freshly cut reed has a sharp, clean scent at first, almost sweet, but the older weed from below the surface smells of silt and trapped air. When it is dragged out, water streams from it in brown threads. Flies gather if the weather is warm. Boots slip. Men laugh quietly or complain without heat, because complaint is also part of labor. A gauger may not do all that cutting himself, but he knows when it is needed. He knows the places where weed gathers first, where the current slackens near a bend or obstruction, where a bridge narrows the flow just enough to catch floating stems. He may tap such knowledge into a note, simple and dry, while remembering the exact feel of that shaded bank underfoot. The office talk is restrained. Someone may ask after a level at a particular board. Someone else may mention a parish boundary, a rate, a broken plank, a gate left open. There may be a kettle or tea dark enough to stand a spoon in. A biscuit tin might sit on a shelf, dented at the lid, smelling faintly of sugar and metal. Even here, water is present. It is in the damp hems of coats. It is in the map lines. It is in the talk. It is in the small anxiety after heavy rain and the small relief after a week of steady drying wind. You learn that a drainage office has its own weather, made from reports, memories, and the quiet calculation of what may need doing next. After the ledger is updated, you may go out again. The day is not finished just because the figures are neat. There may be another gauge to read, another bank to check, another message to carry. Your bicycle waits outside with its black frame shining dully where the mist has settled. You lift it from the wall and feel the cold handlebar through your glove. The road is narrow and flat, bordered by ditches that mirror the sky. You ride slowly, because loose stones can throw a wheel sideways and wet mud can take the tire without warning. The chain clicks in a mild, familiar way. The saddle creaks. Your satchel bumps lightly against your hip. In the distance, the land stretches so evenly that even a low shed seems like a landmark. There is a particular quiet to the fen at midday. It is not silence, it is layered work. A spade enters soil somewhere beyond a hedge. A woman calls from a cottage door. A train may pass toward Ely with a low rumble, brief and surprising against the flatness. Then the sound thins, and you are left again with wind, water, and wheels. When the afternoon light begins to lean across the ditches, we leave the desk and the road behind for a while, and return with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger to the banks themselves, where the day's small changes show most clearly. Afternoon makes the water easier to read in some places and harder in others. The light sits lower, and the gauge marks may shine or disappear depending on the angle. You shade your eyes with one hand. The board is weathered, its black numbers and lines touched up when needed, its lower end darkened by long soaking. The water trembles against it, making each mark breathe. You wait again. Waiting is a tool in this job, as real as the pencil. You wait for ripples to settle, for a cloud to move, for a cart to finish crossing the bridge so the water below stops shivering. Then you take the reading, and the number comes into focus like a word remembered quietly. A drain gauger in 1930s ELY Fen needed trust in repeated observation. One reading could mislead. A set of readings told a story. Rain upstream, a sluggish outfall, a newly cleared channel, a pump running well, a sluice not quite right. All these things appeared not as drama, but as patient difference. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. Higher, lower, steady. You may run your fingers along the top of a sluice gate, feeling damp wood, grit, and the roughness where iron straps hold it together. A sluice is a simple idea, and a serious one. It allows water to be held or released. It has weight, resistance, and consequence. Even when you are only checking it, you treat it with respect. The metal gear may be cold and dark with grease. If a gate has been moved recently, there may be fresh marks where the mechanism turned. You notice whether the opening is clear, whether water is passing evenly, whether debris has caught against the boards. A trapped branch can change the sound of a flow. So can a mat of reed. The ear learns what the eye may miss. At one place the bank has softened. It is not a breach, not a failure, just a slumped edge where wet soil has given way under its own weight. You crouch and press the ground with your heel. It holds, but poorly. The grass roots hang exposed like wet threads. You smell raw earth, darker and sharper than the surface mud. This goes into the notebook. Such notes are humble, yet they are the beginning of maintenance. A man with a spade may come later, or two men with a barrow, or perhaps more, if the bank needs building up with clay, brush, or timber support. The fen is kept not by one grand act, but by thousands of attentions made before trouble can ripen. You stand and brush mud from your knee. It leaves a dark smear that will dry pale by evening. A heron lifts from the far ditch, slow and broad-winged, and for a moment even your practical mind follows it. The bird crosses the drain without concern for boards, maps, or rates. It knows the wet country differently, through hunger, wing, and foot. Then you return to the gauge. That is the kindness of routine. It allows room for a heron, a cloud, a memory, a small ache in the hand, and still brings you back to the task. You are not escaping the world by working. You are entering it by one narrow, useful door. In a low cottage nearby, someone may be making tea. You smell coal smoke and boiled leaves when the wind turns. The scent reaches you across the drain, homely and brief. Perhaps there is bread cooling on a sill, or laundry drawn in before the damp returns. These are not your duties, yet your work touches them quietly, because dry floors and passable roads depend on water going where it should. The 1930s were not soft years for many rural workers. Wages could be low, hours long, and certainty thin. Yet within the difficulty, there were skills that gave shape to a life. A gauger knew his stretch of fen with a closeness that no visitor could quickly borrow. He knew which bridge sang under cartwheels, which ditch smelled sour after rain, which path stayed firm in February, and which one lied. You may meet another worker along the bank, perhaps a man clearing a side drain with a spade. His coat is patched at the elbow. His hands are muddy to the wrist. Each spadeful comes up heavy, with water shining in the cut. You stop long enough to speak, because the condition of a side drain can tell you much about the main channel. The spade makes a soft, thick sound as it enters the mud. It is not the clean chop of garden soil. It is slower, wetter, more bodily. The man lifts, turns, and drops the spoil on the bank. Steam may rise faintly from the opened earth on a cold day. You both look at it without saying much. There is dignity in such watching. Not pride as a grand speech, but the quieter kind. The kind that lives in doing the thing properly when no one is making a fuss. A drain gauger's life is made from those moments. He reads, records, reports, returns. He notices, and then he notices again. As the afternoon wears thinner, we keep beside the ELY Fen Drain Gauger while the light lowers over the black fields, and the working day begins to gather its last readings into evening. The last part of the working day has its own feel, and you sense it before the clock confirms it. The wind has cooled a little, and the damp begins to climb again from ditch and field, touching the lower branches of the willows and darkening the mud along the bank. You draw your coat closer and keep the notebook under your arm, where body heat and habit protect it from the evening air. The water looks different now. Morning water carries the color of waking sky, but evening water holds shadows from both banks. and the gauge board becomes a pale strip in a darker room. You stand still long enough for your eyes to settle. A drain gauger in 1930s ELY Fen cannot rush the last readings, because tired eyes make easy mistakes. You take the measure, and the pencil moves across the page with a slightly softer line than it had at dawn. The damp has got into everything by now. It is in the cuff of your sleeve, in the leather of the satchel, in the creases of your knuckles, and in the faint smell rising from the paper when you open the book. The fen travels home with you this way. Across the fields, a man is leading a horse back toward a yard. The horse's hooves sound hollow where the track has hardened, then dull where the mud deepens. A gate opens, scrapes, and closes again with a sound that seems larger in the open air than it would anywhere else. You pause beside the drain and let the ordinary noises arrange themselves around you. There is a kindness in the way the day narrows. Earlier, every gauge and bridge seemed to call you onward. Now each remaining task feels placed carefully in your hands. You know what still needs doing. You know how far the office or cottage lies. You know which part of the bank will be soft after sunset, and where the bicycle should be wheeled instead of ridden. At a small culvert, you stop to inspect the flow where a side ditch enters the main drain. The sound changes here, a light trickle over brick, giving itself to the deeper, slower channel. You smell wet masonry and the faint sourness of weeds gathered just below the lip. With the toe of your boot, you test the bank, then step down carefully to look closer. A little drift of straw has caught against the culvert mouth. It is not enough to stop the water, but enough to remember. You make a note, short and plain, perhaps only a few words about light obstruction at the side drain. That is how the day speaks in the ledger later. The lived thing becomes a small sentence, and the small sentence becomes work for another pair of hands. You may reach down with a stick and loosen what you can. The straw shifts, darkens, and slides into the main channel, where the current takes it with quiet indifference. The water closes behind it. You stand, wipe your fingers on the grass, and feel the ache in your knees as something familiar, almost companionable. The body keeps its own ledger. By late afternoon, the ELY Fen has a broad and level light that makes distance hard to judge. A cottage may look close for half an hour. A line of poplars may seem to move away as you walk toward it. The cathedral near Ely, if visible, appears to float rather than stand, its stone softened by haze and low sun. You learn not to trust appearances too much. The drain, at least, gives you a line to follow. Its straightness is human, cut through older wetness by survey, spade, tax, argument, and patience. Yet even straight water has moods. Some reaches move with a dull shine. Some are ruffled by wind. Some hold fallen leaves in little turning places near the bank. You notice because noticing is your trade. There is a gauge near a road bridge, where people sometimes stop to talk. A cyclist may ask whether the level is high. A woman carrying a basket may mention that the footpath beyond the bend is going soft. A boy may peer over the parapet and ask what the numbers mean. You answer gently if there is time, because the work is easier when the people around it understand its small signs. You might say the board shows how much water is standing in the drain. You might explain that when rain falls on the fen, it does not simply vanish into deep ground the way it might elsewhere. It gathers in ditches, passes to drains, waits at sluices, and sometimes needs pumps to lift it out toward lower rivers or tidal channels. The boy listens, then looks back at the water as if it has become more interesting. And perhaps it has. Once you know that a quiet ditch is part of a larger system, you never see it as only a ditch again. You begin to sense the hidden order of grips, field drains, loads, washes, banks, sluices, and engines. The fen may appear empty to a passing traveler, but to you it is full of roots. Water is always on its way somewhere. The road bridge is cold under your hand, its bricks hold the day's chill, and the mortar is rough beneath your fingertips. A cart has left traces of straw and mud near the curb. Someone has dropped a matchstick. The drain below carries reflections of wheel spokes, clouds, and the dark underside of the arch, all broken and mended by the moving surface. You read the gauge and write the level. Then you add a note about the culvert if needed, or the state of the bank, or the conversation with the woman and her softening path. These details may seem too small for history, but they are exactly the size of daily life. Most useful things are. They fit into pockets, ledgers, spoken messages, and memory. The work of a drain gauger in 1930s ELY Fen belonged to a world of careful local administration. There were drainage districts, boards, engineers, clerks, foremen, and men sent out for maintenance. The gouger's facts fed into decisions about clearing, repairing, pumping, and watching. You were not always the man who fixed the problem, but you were often the one who first gave it shape. That role requires a certain humility. You do not own the water, you do not own the fields. Often you do not even own the tools you carry. But you are trusted to see correctly, to record plainly, and to avoid making a story larger or smaller than it is. That trust is quiet, and it is earned in weather. As the evening comes on, your route may take you near one of the raised banks that separates higher water from lower land. The path along it gives a view across fields lying almost level with the sky. You can see the long seams of ditches, the dark marks where wheels have crossed, and the smoke lifting from small homes where supper is being made. The smell of coal and boiled potatoes reaches you faintly. You stop because the bank itself must be looked at. A bank has a face, a crown, a foot, and a history of wear. Cattle can damage it. Burrowing animals can weaken it. Rain can cut little runnels down its side. Wind can trouble water against it for hours. The gouger's eye moves slowly along the slope, looking for fresh slips, damp patches, and places where grass has torn. The ground under your boots changes as you climb. The lower path is sticky, but the bank crown may be firmer, packed by years of feet. The grass is short and coarse. In summer, it smells dry and sheepish. In winter, it has almost no smell at all, only the clean coldness of exposed land. You walk the top as if walking the spine of the district. On one side, the drain or river may sit higher than the field. That strange Fenland fact never stops mattering. Water can be above the land it must be kept from. The old drained peat has shrunk over generations, and fields once made dry have settled lower. You feel that arrangement in your bones when you stand between water and soil. You do not dramatize it. Men and women here live with the fact plainly, as others live with hills, stone, or snow. But plain living still needs attention. A small weakness in a bank can become a larger one if ignored, and so you pause, look, tap the turf with your boot, and make your note. The pencil does its patient work again. A flock of birds lifts from a field, turns once in the wide air, and settles farther off. Their wings make a soft rushing sound, like cloth shaken at a distance. You watch them for a breath, then lower your eyes to the bank. The job keeps teaching you this gentle movement between the far and the near. See the horizon, then see the crack in the clay. Perhaps there is a marker post near the bank, leaning slightly, its paint worn by weather. You straighten it if you can, or note it if you cannot. Your fingers smell of wet wood afterward. The evening air enters your sleeves when you lift your arms. You pull them down and continue along the path, feeling the weight of the satchel shift at your side. By now the notebook has become a record of the whole day's weather. Some pages are touched with fine mist. Some corners are smudged where your glove was muddy. There may be a tiny scrap of grass caught in the fold. When you look at the entries, you remember not only the numbers, but the exact place where each one was taken, the sound beneath the bridge, and the angle of the light. That is why a good gauger is more than a measuring instrument. The staff gives a reading, but the person gives context. You know if a board has shifted, if a level seems odd for the rain that fell, if a farmer's report matches what the drains are showing. You know when to trust the number and when to check it twice. In the fading light, that knowledge feels less like a set of rules and more like companionship with a landscape. You and the fen have spent the day together. It has given you damp hems, cold fingers, a few aches, and many small facts. You have given it attention. For this kind of work, that is almost a fair exchange. At the next bridge, the last one before turning back, you pause a little longer than usual. The road is quiet. A bicycle track runs through a shallow puddle and out the other side. The water below holds the dull shine of evening, and the gauge board stands almost colorless in the gloom. You lean close, breathe slowly, and take the reading. The number is steady. That steadiness brings a modest satisfaction. Not excitement, but a feeling like a latch settling into place. Nothing urgent needs saying here. The drain is carrying, the bank is holding, the bridge is clear. You write the figure, add no extra note, and close the book with your thumb resting on the cover. There are days when this would not be so. Heavy rain might bring hurried messages, longer hours, lamps carried along banks, pumps watched through the night, and anxious glances toward rising marks. But tonight, we remain with the ordinary day of the ELY Fen Drain Gauger, because ordinary days are the true fabric of such work. They are where skill lives most of the time. You turn from the bridge and start back. The bicycle waits where you left it against a gate, its frame wet with fine beads of evening damp. You lift it gently, because everything feels quieter now, and set it on the track. The tires make a soft crushing sound over grit and dead grass. You walk at first, then ride where the ground allows. The road home smells of smoke and cooling soil. Somewhere, a paraffin lamp has been lit behind a curtained window. Somewhere else, a gate chain taps again and again in the wind, patient as a clock. Your legs move with the tired steadiness of a body that has done useful work without hurry. The satchel rests warm against your side. When you pass a cottage, you may hear voices through the door before it opens. Then the brief clatter of crockery. A child's laugh escapes. Then the door closes and the sound is folded back into the room. You ride on beside the darkening drain. You are outside those rooms, yet not separate from them. The water you watched all day has something to do with their dry hearths and quiet floors. The fen at dusk is not empty. It is simply wide enough to hold each sound apart. Your own wheels, the far pump, a bird in the reeds, the little knock of a loose mudguard, all of them have their place. You can listen to one, then another, without needing to choose. The work has trained you to hear in layers. At the depot or office, if that is where the day ends, you put the bicycle aside and step indoors with mud on your boots. The room feels warmer than you expected. Coal glows low in the grate. The air holds ink, damp wool, old paper, and the metallic scent of a stove that has been used all winter. You remove your cap and feel the day lift slightly from your head. The ledger waits. Perhaps another man has already gone home, leaving a chair pushed back and a pen across a blotter. Perhaps a clerk remains, spectacles low on his nose, asking for the figures without looking up at first. You give them calmly. The words sound dry compared with the places they came from, but that is how fieldwork becomes office work. You open your notebook and begin copying, place by place, level by level, note by note. A culvert partly obstructed, a bank soft near the bend, weed gathering by the small sluice, gauge steady at the road bridge. Each line is neat enough to be understood tomorrow, and that is the standard that matters. The act of copying slows the mind. Your body may still feel the path, but your hand now follows ruled paper. The day becomes ordered again, not because it was disorderly outside, but because a record must be made in a form others can use. You hear the scratch of the pen. You hear coal settling in the grate. Rain may begin faintly against the window, and everyone in the room notices without speaking. Rain after a day of measuring has a particular effect. It makes tomorrow begin in your thoughts before today has ended. You wonder how much will fall. You wonder which drains will answer first. You think of the soft bank, the culvert straw, the weed near the sluice. A drain gauger never fully leaves the weather behind, even when standing indoors. Yet, the thought is not sharp tonight. It is just part of the work. The fen is a place of returning tasks. Rain returns, weed returns, silt returns, repairs return, and so does the man with the notebook. You close the ledger, blot the ink if needed, and let the facts rest where they belong. If the day ends at home instead, the ritual is different, but just as careful. You may leave your boots near the door, thick with mud at the soles. The laces are stiff where water has dried into them. Your coat goes on a peg, heavy and smelling of reed, smoke, and cold air. The notebook is placed somewhere safe, away from steam and careless hands. There is tea, There may be bread, dripping, a bit of cheese, a stew kept warm, or whatever the household has managed. The food tastes better because the day has been outside. You sit with your hands around the cup and feel heat return to the fingers that held the pencil through mist and wind. The first sip is plain comfort. Someone may ask how the drains are. You answer in the way working people answer, with enough truth and not too much fuss. Holding steady, a bit high near one place, weed wants clearing by another, rain coming maybe. These words enter the room alongside the clink of spoon and cup, as ordinary as talk of prices, school, shoes, or the neighbor's cough. The home lamp gives everything a warmer color. Mud on the boot leather turns brown instead of black. The table grain shows under the light. Steam lifts from the cup in slow curls. Outside, the drain in the fields are still there, though unseen, and the water continues moving through the channels you walked beside all day. The mind may return to one place after supper, perhaps the soft bank, perhaps the boy at the bridge, asking about the numbers, perhaps the steady final reading that gave the evening its small peace. Work like this leaves traces in thought, not as worry always, but as a gentle replay of touch and sound. You see the board again. You hear the water under the arch. In the 1930s ELY Fen, many jobs made their own kind of tiredness. Farm labor bent the back. Engine work filled the ears. Office work fixed the eyes. A drain gauger's tiredness was spread across the whole body, from walking, leaning, writing, watching, and being weathered. It was not heroic. It was simply earned. And after the figures are copied, the coat hung, and the last tea swallowed, we stay a little longer with the quieter knowledge of the ELY Fen Drain Gauger, the knowledge that comes from doing the same careful thing through many mornings and many seasons. Over months, the route becomes almost part of you. You know where the bank narrows before you reach it. You know which gate will stick in damp weather. You know the bridge where frost lies longest, and the stretch where summer midges rise thick from the reeds. The map in the office remains useful, but the map in your feet is older by experience. Spring begins with a soft loosening, the soil smells more open, and the ditches carry the wash of winter away in brown, persistent flow. New grass brightens along the banks. Birds return to the reed beds with busy, hidden sounds, and you notice fresh growth starting where last year's stems stand broken and pale. The water still feels cold when wind crosses it, but the light has changed. In spring, the ELY Fen Drain Gauger watches for rain that comes too often, and for banks softened by weeks of wetness. You may find places where the grass lifts underfoot, loose over saturated soil. You may see field drains running steadily after a shower, their little mouths pouring water into side ditches. Each trickle has a meaning. Each one belongs to the larger account. The gauge boards can look fresh in spring light, even if they are weathered. Black marks stand out against pale timber. Moss darkens near the base. Snails may cling just above the waterline, silent and small. When you bend close, you smell algae, wet wood, and that faint sweetness of new vegetation beginning again after winter's restraint. A farmer may be anxious for land to dry enough for work. You understand this without needing a long explanation. Seed cannot wait forever. Horses and machines need ground that will bear them. Too much water delays everything, yet too little later may trouble the crop. The gauge's readings do not solve all this, but they help everyone speak from the same reality. You walk past fields where men are preparing the soil, and the smell of turned earth is deep and almost warm. Rooks follow the work, stepping black and glossy behind the plow. You hear the creak of harness, the call of a man to a horse, the clod breaking under iron. Beside it all, the drain runs on, doing its plain service. Summer brings another sort of watchfulness. The banks dry and crack in places. Weed grows thick in warm, slow water. Insects gather above the surface, and the air smells of grass, tar, dust, and sun-warmed mud. Your coat is lighter, your boots still necessary, and your notebook may be stained now by sweat instead of rain. The work remains steady. The water may fall lower on the boards, revealing marks that spent winter below the surface. You read them with the same care. Low levels can matter too, especially for navigation in some channels, for the condition of banks, and for the movement of water through the system. The fen is not simply afraid of too much water. It depends on water being managed, held, released, and understood. You may stand in the shade of a willow while writing, grateful for the slight coolness under its leaves. The bark smells dusty and green. Flies move around your hands. Somewhere nearby, a grasshopper makes its dry, ticking sound. The drain gives off a heavier smell in heat. Not unpleasant exactly, but fuller, with silt, weed, and life all rising together. Summer maintenance is often visible. Men cut weed from channels, clear growth from banks, repair boards, and check structures before autumn rain returns. You may speak with them as they work, noting which stretch has been cleared and where the flow has improved. Their shirts cling at the back. Their tools shine wet when lifted from the drain. The bank becomes streaked with cut green weed darkening in the sun. You know how quickly a cleared place can look changed. The water surface opens. The current finds itself again. Bits of trapped debris move along. A gauge reading after clearance may show a small difference, but the eye sees it first, in the way the channel no longer seems to hold its breath. You write the fact plainly, but you feel the satisfaction more fully than the words show. Autumn comes with a brown edge. Leaves gather at culverts and bridge piers. Winds push dry stems into the water. The fields shift from growth to harvest and aftermath, and the air smells of straw, smoke, damp sacks, and bruised vegetation. You may ride past stooks or stacks, past wagons heavy with produce, past yards busy with the last outdoor urgency before winter closes in. For the ELY Fen Drain Gauger, autumn is preparation. You look with winter in mind. A bank that is merely untidy in September may be troublesome in January. A small obstruction at a culvert may become a real nuisance when rain and leaf fall add to it. The notebook fills with practical foresight, written in spare lines that carry more care than they seem to. Morning fogs become common. They soften the world until the drain appears only a few yards at a time. Sound comes strangely through mist. A bell from Ely may seem nearer than it is. Hooves on a road may sound as if they are moving through water. Your own breathing feels close under the cap brim, and the gauge board emerges slowly, like a familiar face. You wipe moisture from the board with your glove if needed. The wood is slick and cold. Droplets gather on the numbers. When you write, the paper resists the pencil slightly, as if the damp has made it tired too. You keep the notebook close to your body whenever you can. A gauger learns many small defenses against weather. Winter is the sternest teacher, though not always the busiest. Frost can bind the grass, harden ruts, and lay a skin of ice along quieter ditches. The main drains may still move darkly in the center, while edges crackle under thin frozen sheets. Your boots sound sharper on the path. The air smells clean, almost metallic, with coal smoke lying low over cottages and yards. On winter mornings, fingers become clumsy. Buttons resist. Pencil points snap more easily. Breath clouds in front of the gauge board while you wait for the waterline to steady. You may stamp your feet gently, not from impatience, but to keep feeling in them. The fen sky in winter can be enormous and pale, and under it a person feels both small and necessary. A drain gauger in 1930s ELY Fen might sometimes find ice complicating a reading. The water beneath may be moving, but the edge is fixed under a brittle surface. You learn where to look, how to break a thin crust if needed, and when to record the condition carefully. Weather is not an interruption of the work. Weather is the work's closest companion. There are days after snow when the landscape becomes almost unreadable. Banks, ditches, road edges, and field boundaries are softened under white. The drain appears as a dark line where water remains open, and the gauge board stands marked against the blankness. Sounds are muffled. Even the pump seems farther away. You move with extra care because the snow hides ruts and weak edges. Yet even then, the routine steadies you. Go to the board. Read what can be read. Look at the flow. Check the bank. Note the condition. Move on. The order of tasks makes a narrow path through difficult weather, and the mind rests in that order. You do not need to think about everything at once. Season after season, your knowledge becomes specific in ways that would sound small to someone outside the work. You know that one gauge is easier to read from the left bank after noon. You know a certain bridge gathers straw after market days. You know where boys fish in summer and sometimes leave lines tangled near the sluice. You know which farmer reports early and which waits until water is nearly in the yard. This is the intimacy of practical labor. It does not announce itself. It grows from repetition, from the humility of returning, and from the senses being allowed to learn. Your eyes learn color, your ears learn flow, your nose learns when a ditch is stale. Your feet learn the difference between surface mud and deeper weakness. The old fen workers often carried such knowledge without naming it grandly. A man might say the drain looks wrong today, and he would be right before he could prove it. He might pause at a bank because the grass lay oddly, or because the water sounded thick beneath a bridge. The gauger's records gave this knowing a formal shape, but the knowing itself came from being there. And as the seasons pass around the same familiar boards and bridges, we move with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger into the smaller tools of the trade, the things carried in pockets and hands, each one plain, worn, and quietly necessary. The first tool is attention, though no one lists it that way. After that comes the notebook, the pencil, the watch, the map, and whatever measuring aids the district requires. You might carry a folding rule, a staff for checking depth in shallow places, or a simple rod for probing silt near a culvert. None of it looks impressive laid on a table. In use, each thing becomes exact. The notebook is handled most. Its cover may be oilcloth, leather, or stout card, chosen less for beauty than for survival. Rain spots make dark blooms on it. The corners soften. The spine remembers the curve of your hand. When you open it outdoors, you shield it with your body, turning slightly away from the wind as if protecting a match flame. Inside, the pages carry place names that become almost rhythmic. A bridge, a sluice, a pumping station, a culvert, a bank, another gauge. The names may be official, local, or a mixture of both. Some are printed on maps. Some live mostly in speech. You learn them as part of the work's music, and after a while they come to mind in their proper order. The pencil is humble but faithful. Ink can run in rain, and fountain pens can be fussy in cold hands, so a pencil has a deep common sense about it. You keep it in a pocket where it can be found without searching. Sometimes you carry a spare. A lost pencil on a wet bank can become a surprisingly large nuisance. You sharpen it with a knife, turning the wood slowly, letting the shaving curl away. The smell of fresh cedar, if the pencil is that kind, comes bright and sudden against the damp fen air. The point need not be elegant. It only needs to make a clear mark. You test it with a small line at the page edge, then return to the day. The watch matters because water levels belong to time. A reading without a time is like a sentence without its verb. You take the watch from a pocket, feel its smooth case, and note the hour. On cold days, the metal bites a little. On warm days, it feels almost soft from being carried close to the body. The ticking is usually too quiet to hear outside, but in the office, it may become part of the room. Maps help, but slowly. The Fen map is a web of drains, cuts, drove roads, parish lines, and boundaries that do not always feel obvious on the ground. You may unfold a map on a desk more often than on a windy bank. Outdoors, paper becomes a sail. Indoors, under lamplight, you trace the line of a drain with one finger and match it to what your boots already know. There may be printed forms for reports. There may be ledgers with columns laid out for date, place, level, remarks, and initials. The clerk values neatness because later decisions depend on reading old marks correctly. You understand this. A smudge can travel farther than a footstep if it confuses the record. So you slow your hand and write as plainly as the day allows. Clothing is part of the equipment too. A cap keeps rain from the eyes. A thick coat carries the smell of weather. Gloves protect the fingers, but make pages harder to turn. Boots matter most of all. A poor boot can turn a whole route into discomfort, and a leaking one makes cold water feel personal before the morning is half done. You may stuff newspaper inside wet boots overnight, if there is enough paper to spare. You may dry socks near a fire, not too close, because wool can stiffen and scorch. You may rub a little grease into leather when it begins to crack. These domestic acts belong to the job as much as the reading of a gauge. Work follows a person home in practical ways. A bicycle extends the route, but only where the land permits it. The fen roads can be straight, narrow, and exposed. Mud clings to tires. Wind can make riding feel like pushing against a door that never opens. Still, the bicycle saves time between scattered points, and its familiar sounds become part of your day. Chain, pedal, brake, and the faint knock of tools in the satchel. When you stop, you lean it carefully where it will not slide into a ditch. That sounds obvious until you have worked beside water long enough. Everything near a drain must be placed with thought. A dropped pencil, a loose glove, a leaning bicycle, even a lunch tin can find the water if care is absent. The fen does not snatch things, it simply receives what is offered. In the pumping station, the tools change. There are spanners, oil cans, rags, gauges of another kind, and heavy moving parts that belong more to the engine man than to you. Yet you notice them. The oil can has a long spout darkened at the end. The rag is stiff with grease. The floor may be gritty underfoot. The air is warmer, noisier, and thicker than outside. You may stand near the engine man while he points out a small fault or an adjustment made during the day. His voice must rise slightly over the engine, but not in alarm. You both look at the machinery with the calm of people who know that most trouble begins small. A knock, a vibration, a smell of hot oil, a change in rhythm. These are readings too. Outside, your own instruments are simpler, but the principle is the same. Measure what changes. Notice what should not change. Record clearly. Speak to the right person. Return when needed. A whole district can be cared for by such plain rules. If enough people follow them steadily, there is an old satisfaction in laying out the day's items at home. Cap on peg, coat by the door, notebook on the shelf, pencil beside it. Boots turned slightly toward the fire, but not too near. The satchel emptied of any damp paper. Each thing has its place because tomorrow will be easier if tonight is orderly. You know the feel of the notebook even in low light. You know the weight of it when it is full of a wet day's pages. You know the slight hollow in a pencil where your fingers grip it. These small familiarities are part of the warmth of work. They make the job not just an occupation, but a set of repeated gestures that fit the hand. And when the tools are put by, we follow the ELY Fen Drain Gauger back into the landscape of people, because this quiet occupation belonged not only to water and boards, but to villages, farms, engines, offices, and the shared trust of a low country. In a fen village, drainage is never far from conversation. It may not be the first thing said at the shop counter, but it waits beneath many other subjects. Rain, roads, fields, harvest, rent, wages, and repairs all touch it in some way. The drain gouger hears these threads as he moves through ordinary places, and he learns which comments are passing talk and which deserve a note. At the blacksmith's or repair yard, you might stop for a moment while a bolt is made, a hinge mended, or an iron fitting discussed. The air smells of coal, hot metal, horse and oil. Sparks may rise and vanish like brief fireflies, though no one pauses to admire them for long. Workmen speak in practical fragments. This wants straightening. That will hold. Bring it back when it cracks again. Such places support the drainage world indirectly. A sluice needs ironwork. A cart needs a wheel. A pump needs parts. A gate needs hinges. The fen is kept not by one profession, but by a quiet mesh of skills, each one knowing its own material. The gauger's material is water, but he depends on those who know wood, iron, leather, brick, and engine grease. At a village shop you may buy a pencil, tobacco, matches, or something for the house. The floorboards creak. The air holds tea, soap, flour, paraffin, and damp coats. Someone asks whether the drains are falling. You answer while coins lie warm in your palm. The shopkeeper nods, because a water level can matter as much as a price when land is low. Children know you as the man with the book, or the man who reads the boards. They may not know the title drain gauger, but they know the shape of the work. They see you at bridges, at banks, at sluices, always looking down toward water. A few may imitate the act, leaning over a ditch and pretending to write. In this way, even obscure jobs become part of a child's map of the world. Older men may remember when drains were cleared differently, or when a pump failed, or when a winter flood came closer than anyone liked. They tell these stories without drama, because the Fen has trained them not to waste breath on decoration. You listen for the useful piece inside the memory. A place that failed once may deserve watching always. There are women's observations too, often sharper than official records give them credit for. A woman who walks the same path to market knows when a ditch has begun to smell wrong. A woman who keeps a cottage knows when damp creeps under a door more often than it did. She may tell you while standing with a basket on her arm, and you would be foolish not to hear her. The gouger's authority, if he has any, grows from responsiveness. People will tell him more if they believe he will look, record, and pass it on. If he dismisses them, they may stop speaking. In low country, silence can be costly, so you cultivate a manner that is neither officious nor vague. You take things seriously without making a performance of concern. Sometimes the message you carry is not welcome. A farmer may want water lowered more quickly. Another may need it held. Upstream and downstream interests are not always the same. A drainage system is a shared arrangement, and shared arrangements can rub against private wishes. You stand in the middle with your figures, which are not a magic solution, but at least give the discussion a firm floor. You learn to speak carefully. The water at one gauge is this high. The flow at a certain sluice is clear. The pump has run. The bank is sound there, soft here. Facts do not remove every disagreement, but they cool the air a little. They give practical men something to work with besides suspicion. In the office, letters may be written from these facts. Notices may be sent. Work crews may be assigned. A foreman may plan a day's clearing because your note marked the place clearly enough. The line between your wet morning and another man's spade is often short, even if it passes through paper first. That is one of the quiet satisfactions of the job. The ELY Fen itself has long memories of collective labor. Draining wet land was never a single person's achievement, whatever old pamphlets or proud engineers might claim. It took diggers, surveyors, investors, local laborers, engine tenders, carpenters, masons, and generations of people paying, arguing, repairing, and adapting. By the 1930s, the gauger inherited that long chain and added his small daily link. You feel this most strongly near older channels. Some loads and cuts carry names that reach back through centuries of trade, drainage, and travel. Boats once moved goods along waterways where now your concern may be level, flow, and maintenance. The banks remember more uses than one. A quiet drain can be a former highway, boundary, workplace, and worry all at once. At certain times of year, eel traps, fishing lines, or small boats may appear along the water. You notice them in relation to your work. Anything placed in water can interfere if carelessly set, though most local people understand the system well enough to avoid trouble. A short conversation solves more than a notice would. You point. They nod. The line is moved. This is how much of the district functions, through small adjustments made before they harden into conflicts. A gate closed properly, a ditch cleared when asked, a plank repaired before someone falls, a message carried to the right shed or office. Your day is full of these quiet preventions, and because they work, they leave little trace. A visitor might say, "Nothing happens in the Fen." You know better. The happening is slow, practical, and constant. Water rises by inches, weed thickens by stems, banks wear by weather and hoof, records grow by lines, trust grows by kept promises. The low country is always being made livable again, one ordinary act at a time. As evening settles over the village and the lamps begin to glow behind thin curtains, we stay with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger in that web of ordinary trust, then drift back toward the water, where the night work of the landscape continues without speech. Night changes the drains even when no one is walking beside them. The air cools, mist forms, and the surface of the water turns from brown to black. Sounds carry farther. A pump heard faintly by day may seem nearer after dark, its rhythm moving through fields and over ditches. You may lie in bed and know by the weather whether tomorrow's readings will be different. Sometimes duty calls a gauger out late, though not every night and not with any grand commotion. Heavy rain may require checking a level. A report may need confirming. A pump may be watched through an awkward hour. When you go out after dark, the world becomes smaller, held in the circle of a lamp, and the memory of paths you know by daylight. The lamp has its own smell, warm metal and paraffin, with a faint smoke if the wick is not trimmed cleanly. Its light touches wet grass, the toe of your boot, the pale edge of a gate, and then the dark beyond takes everything back. You walk more slowly at night. The bank is familiar, but familiarity is not permission to be careless. A gauge board read by lamplight looks strange. The marks jump forward, then recede. Water flashes where the flame catches it. Your shadow falls across the board, and you must shift to see properly. The night air enters your collar, and the notebook is harder to manage with one hand holding the lamp. Every action becomes deliberate. You listen more at night. The flow under a bridge may tell you whether debris has gathered before the lamp shows it. A loose board knocks softly in the water. Reeds scrape together. Somewhere in the dark, an animal moves through dry grass, then is still. The fen does not sleep as people sleep. It continues its slow exchanges under cloud and star. In the 1930s, before bright electric light was common across every rural corner, darkness had weight. It made distances longer and edges less certain. Yet for the ELY Fen Drain Gauger, the night route was not unknown country. It was the same banks, bridges, and boards, only quieted and reduced to touch, sound, and the small amber circle of flame. If rain is falling, the lamp glass beads with water. Drops tick on your cap. Mud grows slick underfoot. The gauge line trembles with each ripple, and you wait longer than you would by day. There is no one nearby to hurry you. The reading must be right, so you let the rain speak, and then you write through it as best you can. Returning from such a check, you may see the village from a distance, low lights gathered in the dark. The sight is simple and strong. Those rooms are why the banks are watched, why pumps are maintained, why records are kept, why men walk out with notebooks in weather that would rather keep them indoors. The thought is not sentimental, it is practical tenderness. Most nights, though, the gauger sleeps while the water moves. The tools rest, the pencil lies still, the boots dry imperfectly by the door. Outside, ditches continue to deliver their small burdens to larger drains, and the larger drains continue toward engines, sluices, rivers, and outfalls. The system works while no one is admiring it. Morning will ask again. That is one of the quiet truths of this work. Nothing stays measured forever. Yesterday's careful figure becomes useful memory, but today needs its own reading. The fen changes too gently to be left alone, and too persistently to be dismissed. You return because returning is the work. When dawn comes after rain, the whole landscape smells washed and dark. Puddles lie in cart ruts. Grass leans under droplets. The drains are fuller, their surfaces broken by small rings where water still falls from bankside stems. You step out into the grey morning and feel the first wet touch at the edge of your boot. The day has begun before anyone says so. You go first to the point most likely to show change. Experience sends you there. The road may be slick. The bicycle may be left behind if the wind is hard. Your coat is buttoned high, and the notebook sits under it until needed. The world is all greys, browns, and dull greens, with the gauge board waiting like a pale measure of what the night has done. At the board, the water is higher. Not alarming, perhaps, but clearly higher. You read it twice. The second reading agrees. You write the figure and the time, then stand a moment longer, watching the flow. It is stronger than yesterday, carrying bits of leaf, straw, and peat. The sound under the bridge has deepened by a note. This is the moment when yesterday's notes become more valuable. You remember the soft bank. You remember the culvert with straw. You remember the weed by the sluice. A wet morning connects scattered observations into a route of priorities. You do not need to panic. You need to proceed in the right order. The soft bank comes next. You walk there with care, feeling the mud take more from each step. The bank is wetter, but still holding. A little more soil has slumped where you pressed your heel the day before. You mark it again, more firmly in the notes this time. The smell of raw earth rises fresh and cold, and a trickle runs down the exposed face. At the culvert, water pushes through faster, and the straw you loosened is gone. More debris has gathered. but it is passing for now. You watch for several minutes. That waiting may save a needless report, or it may reveal a developing problem. The skill lies in not deciding too quickly. You let the water show you what it is doing. The rain morning is not dramatic. It is busy in a quiet way. You may need to send word to the office sooner than usual. You may stop at a farm to ask whether a ditch has backed. You may adjust the route to include a vulnerable place. The work remains the same in spirit, only with closer spacing between observations. Your body warms despite the wet, because movement and concentration generate their own heat. The pencil marks are darker where the paper is damp. Your hands smell of rain, wool, graphite, and mud. A drop runs from your cap brim onto the page, and you blot it with the edge of your sleeve, not perfectly, but well enough. A gouger's calm is not indifference. It is trained steadiness. The fen does not benefit from alarm, and neither do the people who depend on the reports. You notice the rise, you note the conditions, you communicate clearly, and you continue. If action is needed, action will be arranged. If watching is enough, then watching is done properly. Later, perhaps, the pump runs longer. The engine's rhythm reaches across the wet fields with a deeper insistence. You may visit the station and find the engine man already at work, his face lit by the practical glow of machinery and morning light. The room smells strongly of oil and heat. Water thunders or churns somewhere below, transformed from quiet level into lifted force. You share your readings. He shares what the pump has been doing. The conversation is brief but complete. The gauge at one point is up. The flow at another is strong. The bank needs watching. The weed may slow the side channel. Outside, rainwater taps from the eaves, and inside, the engine continues its steady labor. Standing there, you feel the partnership between observation and power. The pump can move water, but it must be used with knowledge. The gauger cannot move much water by himself, but he can tell where it is rising, and where the system is under strain. Neither role is enough alone. Together, they keep the ordinary world ordinary. By afternoon, the rain may ease. The sky lifts a little, the wet banks shine. Water still runs everywhere, along furrows, under gates, through grips, into ditches, and onward. You can almost see the whole district breathing out after holding the rain. The readings will remain higher for a while, and tomorrow will tell the next part of the story. You return to the office with a fuller book. The door sticks slightly in damp weather, and you shoulder it open. Inside, the smell of coal smoke seems stronger after rain. You lay out the notebook, give the urgent points first, and then fill in the rest. A clerk listens. A foreman may be called. A name is written beside a task. The day becomes organized labor. No one speaks of heroics. A bank wants attention. A culvert wants clearing. The pump will continue. Another reading should be taken later. This is how care sounds in practical rooms. It uses plain verbs: check, clear, watch, send, mend, record. Each word carries a person into motion somewhere in the wet district. And after the rain has passed and the drains begin their slow return, we remain with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger through the quieter days that follow, when the land dries by degrees and patience becomes visible in falling marks. The first day after rain often feels unsettled. The sky may brighten, but water is still arriving from fields and side ditches. A person who only looks upward might think the weather is over. You know to look downward. The drains continue to rise or hold after the clouds have moved on, because the fen has its own delay. Water takes time to travel through a flat country. You check the same boards again. Some levels are steady, some have fallen a little, some remain stubbornly high where flow is slowed. Each figure helps build the after-rain picture. You compare them with yesterday's entries, turning the page carefully, keeping one thumb on the new line and one on the old. The notebook becomes a conversation between days. The sound of water changes as it falls. The urgent note under a bridge softens. The surface loses some of its roughness. Debris catches less forcefully against posts. A bank that smelled raw yesterday may begin to dry at the edges, the exposed clay lightening from dark brown to a duller gray. You notice these small easing signs with quiet pleasure. At the soft bank, perhaps men have already worked. You see fresh spade marks, newly placed clay, maybe brush or timber used to strengthen the edge. The repair looks raw but serviceable. Footprints crowd the bank. The smell is strong. Wet earth and sweat, with a faint trace of tobacco from the men who stood there. You record the condition and move on. At the culvert, debris has been cleared. The mouth is open, water slipping through in a clean sheet over the brick lip. You crouch and listen. The sound is even now. No hidden knocking, no sucking pause, no thick hesitation. It is satisfying in the way a swept floor is satisfying. The work may not be beautiful in any showy sense, but order has returned. A farmer you spoke with before may meet you by the gate. He does not praise the system extravagantly. He only says it is running better now, or that the lower field is beginning to take air. You nod. That is enough. In working country, gratitude often wears the clothes of a simple report. The fact itself is the thanks. As levels fall, the gauge boards reveal the story in reverse. Marks that were hidden under high water appear again. Mud lines show where the peak reached. Strands of grass cling to posts above the present surface. You can read the floods passing almost like rings in wood, not permanent, but clear for a little while before weather cleans it away. The drain gauger's records preserve what the water itself will forget. In a week, the bank may look ordinary again. The culvert may show no sign of straw. The repaired place may blend into grass. But the ledger will hold the rise, the note, the action, and the fall. A quiet archive of weather and response grows page by page. This is where your years in the work matter. One wet spell is a passing event. Many wet spells become knowledge. You begin to know which repairs last, which obstructions repeat, which fields always report late, which gauge responds first to rain from a certain direction. The old entries are not just dead paper. They are the fen remembering itself through human hands. Sometimes you may be asked to compare present levels with those from past months or years. The ledger opens backward. Dust rises faintly from older pages. The ink has browned a little. You run a finger down columns written by yourself or by another gauger before you. The handwriting changes, but the water's habits remain partly recognizable. There is humility in seeing that someone else once stood where you stand. Another man leaned over the same bridge, felt the same wind, cursed the same mud perhaps, and wrote a figure now used again. Work becomes a chain across time, not in a grand monument, but in repeated handwriting. You add your line beneath his, and one day someone may read yours. Outside, after rain, the fen smells alive and heavy. Worm casts mark the path. Rooks call over softened fields. The drains carry tiny fragments of the land, peat, straw, leaf, seed, and soil. You walk beside that mixture and feel how everything is connected by movement. Nothing in the low country is entirely separate from water, and as the land slowly steadies after weather, we go deeper into the long memory of ELY Fen, not as a lesson from a book, but as the kind of history a drain gauger feels underfoot while he moves from gauge to gauge. Long before your notebook, this country held more open water, reed bed, wet pasture, and uncertain ground. People lived with it, used it, fished it, cut reed from it, traveled by it, and feared it when floods came. Then came schemes to drain and manage, to cut channels and raise banks, to turn wetness into farmland. The result was never final. It was always a bargain renewed. By the 1930s, the bargain was old enough to feel ordinary and fragile enough to require daily care. You can sense both truths when you stand on a bank above land, lower than the water beside you. The scene looks settled. Fields are ploughed, cottages stand, roads cross, and cattle graze. Yet the settlement depends on maintenance as surely as a lamp depends on oil. The drain gauger is one small keeper of that bargain. You are not designing great works or giving speeches. You are reading a board in a cold wind. But that reading belongs to centuries of effort. The line between ordinary and historical is thinner than it seems. It may be no wider than the pencil mark you make before breakfast. Some drainage cuts in the fens were made under famous engineers and ambitious plans. Others were improved by local effort over long years, through practical changes that rarely entered popular memory. A district might adjust a bank, deepen a drain, replace timber, install a pump, alter a sluice, or settle a dispute over water rights. These changes shaped daily life more than many celebrated events. You feel history in the names. A load may carry an old trading memory. A wash may speak of controlled flooding. A drove road may recall cattle moving across higher ground. A cut may bear the mark of a family, engineer, parish, or purpose now half forgotten. As you pass these places, the names are not ornaments. They are working labels in a working landscape. The cathedral at Ely stands as the visible old thing, high and unmistakable. Travelers notice it first. Artists paint it. Visitors call it noble, which it is. But the drains around Ely have their own architecture, lower and less admired. Banks, sluices, bridges, gauge boards, and pumping stations form a practical cathedral of maintenance, spread flat across the country. You would not put it that way aloud at the office. The phrase would sound too fancy over tea and ledgers. But walking alone at dusk, with water on one side and dark fields on the other, you may feel something close to reverence. Not awe that lifts you out of yourself, but respect that places you more firmly where you are. A gauge board is a modest object. Still, it stands between past and future every day. Its marks record present water against a structure built by earlier labor and used to decide later action. It is a meeting place of time. You lean toward it, squint at a wet line, and take part in that meeting without fanfare. The old fen was sometimes described as wild by outsiders, but for those who lived there, it was also home, resource, road, larder, and workplace. Drainage changed those relations. It brought rich soil into cultivation and created other vulnerabilities. The gauger's world is the world after those changes, where the daily question is not whether to drain, but how to maintain what has been made. That maintenance is never done. Silt settles, peat shrinks, wood rots, iron rusts, weed grows, rain falls, engines wear. Human arrangements loosen, unless tightened by meetings, rates, inspections, and labor. This could sound wearying, but inside the work it becomes a rhythm. The world asks, and people answer. You are one of the people answering. Your answer is not loud. It is the closing of a gate, the reading of a mark, the report of a soft bank, the memory of a gauge after rain. You answer by going back. In a place like ELY Fen, returning is one of the deepest forms of care. As the thought settles, you keep walking. Because history does not relieve a man from finishing his round. The next gauge waits near a small bridge where the parapet is chipped and the bank grass grows long. The water below smells of silt and last year's leaves. You bend, read, write, and the old bargain continues for another line. There may be times when the job feels lonely. Open land can make a person aware of the space around him. On a dull afternoon, with no one on the road and no sound but wind along the reeds, you might feel as if the whole district has withdrawn indoors and left you outside with the water. Even then, the loneliness is not empty. It has texture. You hear your coat move. You hear mud release your boot. You hear a distant pump, perhaps only imagined at first, then real. You smell peat and smoke. You see the pale board at the edge of the dark drain. The senses keep company with you. So does the route, because every bend and bridge carries the memory of previous days. At other times, the work is quietly sociable. A maintenance gang may share bread on the bank. A clerk may pour tea without asking. An engine man may wave you in to warm your hands. A farmer may walk with you as far as the next gate, talking of soil, weather, and a horse that has gone slightly lame. These brief companionships stitch the day together. The drain gauger learns to be comfortable in both modes. Alone, he notices. With others, he listens. Neither skill is hurried. Both are useful. In a noisy trade, a man might prove himself by force or speed. Here, usefulness often comes from being steady enough that people speak plainly and water is read correctly. And now, as the long memory of the fen rests beneath the ordinary evening, we move with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger toward the small domestic end of another day, where the work does not vanish, but becomes quiet enough to sleep beside. The walk back is slower now, not because you are failing, but because the day has used its share of strength. Your shoulders feel the satchel. Your feet know every seam inside the boots. The air has cooled, and the smell of evening fires thickens near the village. The drains darken beside you, still carrying water with the same patient sound. A final glance at one familiar board may be enough if no reading is required. You know its stance, its lean, its color against the bank. You might check that no debris has gathered since morning. You might touch the post lightly as you pass, a habit so small you barely notice it. Work creates gestures that outlive their first purpose. At home, the door opens to warmth, or at least to shelter. The room may be modest, the fire not large, the table plain. But after the fen wind, it feels close and human. You smell supper, damp wool, coal, wood, soap, and the faint sweetness of drying clothes. The sounds are smaller than outside, contained by walls and ceiling. You remove the day in layers. Cap first, satchel next, coat from the shoulders. Boots last, because boots require negotiation after mud. The floor near the door bears old marks from other evenings. No one is surprised by this. A working house knows that clean thresholds are ideas more than facts during wet months. The notebook is checked once more. Not studied perhaps, just made sure to be dry enough and safe enough for morning. A loose page is tucked in. A pencil is placed beside it. If a message must be delivered early, you leave a note where you cannot miss it. Such small preparations let the mind loosen its grip. At the table, conversation moves around the work without always settling on it. Someone speaks of a neighbor. Someone mentions the price of coal. Rain is discussed because rain is always eligible for discussion. You add what you know, but gently. The levels are falling. The bank repair held. The pump ran well. The words sit among spoons, plates, and steam. After supper, hands may be washed more thoroughly. Mud remains under nails if the day has been stubborn. Warm water clouds in the basin. Soap smells plain and sharp. The skin around the knuckles may be cracked from cold and damp. You dry your hands carefully, because tomorrow will ask them to do the same work again. There might be a newspaper, folded and refolded. News from cities, parliament, markets, and foreign places enters the small room in columns of print. You read some of it, perhaps, but the mind returns to local water more easily than to distant speeches. The fen has a way of keeping attention near the ground. It does not forbid the wider world. It simply insists on its own claims. If you step outside before bed, the night air is cool and soft. The sky may be clouded or full of stars. The village has settled. A last bicycle passes, then fades. From far off, if conditions are right, the sound of a pump or a train may come across the flat land. You stand in the doorway and listen, knowing how distance behaves here. The drain is not visible from every home, but you can imagine it. You know the nearest bridge, the line of the bank, the board standing in the dark, the water touching its marks. You know where the repaired clay is still damp. You know where cut weeds lie on the bank. The day remains laid out in your mind like a map under low lamplight. Then the door closes. The room gathers itself again. Boots rest by the wall. The coat hangs heavy but still. The notebook lies closed. Outside, the fen continues without needing to be watched every moment. This is part of trust too, knowing when the work is done enough for the night. Sleep comes with the body still remembering motion. You may feel, just before drifting, the slight lean over a gauge board, the pause before reading, the pencil moving across damp paper. You may hear water under a bridge, not loud, not troubled, just moving. The mind lets the sound become softer than thought, and when morning waits beyond the dark, we leave the ELY Fen Drain Gauger not at an ending, but inside the same slow round, where the next pale light will find the banks, the boards, the water, and the quiet man returning. Returning is never exactly repetition, though from far away it may look that way. The same path has taken rain in the night, or frost, or a scatter of leaves, or the narrow prints of someone who crossed before dawn. You notice these changes because the work has trained your eyes to begin low, at the ground, where the fen often tells its first quiet truth. The morning may be pale and dry after the darker evening before. Mist lies in the hollows of the ditches, not thick enough to hide the way, but enough to soften the banks and make each willow look farther off than it is. You step onto the track with your satchel at your hip, and the leather creaks once, a small sound that belongs only to the beginning of a day. The air smells of peat, smoke, and wet grass. A 1930s ELY Fen Drain Gauger begins again with no ceremony. The board will not read itself because it was read yesterday. The water will not remain steady because a ledger says it was steady last week. You go out because the land is low, the drains are living channels, and useful knowledge must be renewed before it can be trusted. At the first gauge, the mist has gathered in droplets on the timber. You wipe the board lightly with the edge of a glove, careful not to smear mud across the marks. The waterline appears, dark and fine, and you wait for a little wave from a passing breeze to settle. Then the number comes clear. Your pencil moves. The morning has its first fact. Nearby, the reeds are still. Their dry stems click softly when the wind turns, but for a few moments they stand as if listening with you. A moorhen slips away under the bank, leaving a widening ripple that reaches the gauge and makes the line tremble again. You smile, perhaps, not broadly, just inwardly. The fen has its small interruptions and you learn to include them. The next point lies past a field where men have already started work. You see their shoulders moving in the half-light, dark shapes against darker soil. One calls to another, and the sound reaches you thinned by distance. The smell of horses comes from the lane, warm and earthy, mingled with harness leather and damp straw. The drain beside you reflects all of it without keeping any of it. You know that the field drains hidden under that soil are part of your concern, even if you cannot see them. Clay pipes or simpler cuts may carry water from the ground to the ditches. When they run freely, the land breathes. When they clog, the field holds water too long and the crop suffers. A gauger does not repair every buried line, but he reads the signs of their health where they meet the open channels. At a side ditch, you pause to watch a small flow entering the main drain. It is clear enough today, with only a little peat color, and its sound is a light slipping over stones and brick. You crouch, feeling the cold of the ground through the fabric at your knee. The smell here is different from the main drain, sharper, with roots and wet clay close to the surface. The entry is clear. You write nothing more than perhaps a mental note, because not every observation needs a line. That, too, is part of judgment. A notebook that records everything can become as confusing as one that records too little. You learn to distinguish between the ordinary details that simply belong to a place and the changes that may ask for action. And as the mist begins to lift, we move with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger from the intimate first readings toward the working stretch near the sluices, where water is not only watched, but guided through timber, iron, and patient human adjustment. The sluice stands at a slight narrowing of the channel, where the banks are worn by years of feet and the grass has been pressed flat near the mechanism. You approach slowly, because the ground at such places can be uneven, with old ruts hidden by growth and slick patches near the water's edge. The timber smells of tar, dampness, and age. The iron smells cold with a trace of grease where hands have worked it. Here the water speaks more distinctly. It presses through an opening with a low, continuous sound, not loud, but fuller than the open drain. You stand beside it and listen before taking any measurement. A clean passage has one kind of voice. A partly blocked passage has another, broken by knocks, swirls, and sudden pulls. Your ear takes the reading before your pencil does. The gate is set where it should be for the day, perhaps adjusted earlier by another man or left from the last instruction. You do not change it without cause or authority. The ELY Fen Drain Gauger is a watcher and reporter more than a master of gates, and that boundary matters. Still, you examine the position, the water upstream, the water downstream, the marks on the boards, and the debris that might gather against the structure. A short length of reed has caught along one side. You remove it with a hooked stick kept nearby, or with a branch if that is what the place offers. It comes free with a wet slap and drifts away, turning slowly in the current. Your glove is damp afterward, and the smell of green rot clings faintly to the wool. You rub your fingers together and keep moving. The gauge above the sluice is read first, then the one below if there is a board set there. The difference between them says something about how water is being held or passed. The figures are plain, but together they describe pressure, movement, and the state of the channel. You write them with care, placing the upstream and downstream notes where they cannot be confused. A bridge nearby carries a lane used by carts and bicycles. Mud has dried in ridges on the approach, and the wheel ruts hold thin brown water. When a cart crosses, the bridge trembles slightly, and the surface below shivers in little overlapping rings. You wait, because patience costs less than correcting a bad entry. The horse's breath steams in the morning air, and its hooves strike the boards with a hollow sound. The driver looks down and asks how she is running. He means the drain, or the sluice, or perhaps the whole wet country gathered into one pronoun. You say, she is steady enough today, though there is weed beginning above the gate. He nods as if this confirms something he already suspected, then clicks his tongue to the horse. The cart moves on, carrying sacks, rope, and the smell of damp straw. You bend again to your page. The handwriting is slow because your fingers are cold, and because the pencil point has dulled. A small grey crumb of graphite catches at the edge of a word. You turn the pencil slightly, and continue. The morning has become a series of such small accommodations, each one unnoticed if done well. At the sluice, you also look at the banks upstream. Water held even a little higher can test weak places. The grass along the edge is dark with moisture, but no fresh slip shows. A line of old stakes supports one section, their tops worn smooth and black. You press one with your hand. It holds. You note the condition in memory, and perhaps in the book if it has changed since the last round. There is a quiet satisfaction in finding a structure doing its work. The sluice does not look grand. It is timber, iron, bolts, mud, weed, and water. Yet it makes decisions visible. It holds back, releases, slows, and directs. It is an answer built into the landscape, and your part is to see whether the answer still fits the question being asked today. By late morning, the light grows stronger, and the mist opens fully. So we follow the ELY Fen Drain Gauger along the banks toward the maintenance men, where the same water measured in inches becomes weight in a rake, mud on a boot, and labor in the hands. You hear the men before you see them. There is a scrape of metal on stone, a low remark, and the thick splash of something pulled from the drain and thrown onto the bank. Around the bend, a small crew works at clearing weed from a narrowed stretch. Their jackets are set aside on the grass, and their shirts are dark at the shoulders from effort. The air smells green, sour, and wet. They use long-handled tools, reaching down into the channel and drawing up mats of weed that cling like soaked cloth. The plants come heavy from the water, streaming brown threads back into the drain. When they land on the bank, they slump in glossy heaps. Flies find them quickly if the day is warm. Today the air is cool enough that the smell remains close, but not overpowering. You stand where you can speak without getting in the way. A foreman, if there is one, may wipe his hands on his trousers and come over. You compare the place with the note from earlier in the week. The flow was sluggish then. It already looks better now. The men have cleared perhaps several yards, though no one says it with any flourish. The work is visible enough. The gauger's role here is part confirmation, part communication. You may record that clearing has begun, that the worst obstruction has been removed, or that another section still needs attention. You may ask whether they found silt as well as weed, whether the bank held under their feet, whether any timber near the culvert looked loose. Their answers come in plain language, with glances toward the water. One man lifts a rakeful of weed and pauses to let it drain before swinging it up. Water patters from the tangle in dozens of small streams. His boots are sunk ankle-deep in mud at the edge. The handle creaks under the weight. You feel the effort in your own shoulders as you watch. Some labor can be understood just by seeing how slowly a man moves after each lift. The cleared water below the work site looks brighter. Current, freed from the thick growth, threads through in a more open line. Bits of loosened plant drift past your boots. A bubble rises and breaks with a soft plop. The smell of disturbed silt deepens for a moment, dark and old, like a cellar opened after rain. You make a note because the change matters. The men may joke quietly among themselves, not loudly, because repetitive labor finds its own low rhythm. Someone says the weed grows better than any crop. Another says it should pay rates then. The humor is mild, worn smooth by repetition, and it passes as quickly as it came. They return to the tools. The drain receives their attention without comment. You may share tobacco or news from another stretch, or simply stand for a few moments while the foreman points out where the bank shelves awkwardly under the water. That hidden shape affects how weed gathers. It also affects where a man can safely stand. Your eyes follow his gesture, but your mind adds it to a store of practical knowledge that will help the next time this reach runs slow. A maintenance site has many textures: wet weeds slick underfoot, dry grass above the bank, iron cold in the hand, mud sucking at boot soles, the rough grain of tool handles polished by palms. You take these things in, because the work of measuring is never separate from the work of doing. The figures in your book belong to these wet, tired bodies. When you leave, the men are still working. The sound of their tools fades behind you, replaced by the ordinary whisper of the reeds and the soft wash of water against the bank. You carry away not only a note of progress, but a sense of the human labor behind every improved reading. A lower level after clearance is not just a number. It is men pulling weight from a channel in cold air. Past the maintenance crew, the drain widens slightly, and the banks grow less disturbed. You walk on, and your steps settle again. The satchel bumps once, then finds its rhythm. A skylark, almost invisible above the field, pours sound into the pale sky, and for a moment, the fen feels open in every direction. You keep to the path, because the next reading waits. At this board, the water has fallen a little since the last visit. The change is small, but expected after the clearing upstream. You read it twice, enjoying the quiet agreement between observation and cause. The system is complicated, but not mysterious when treated patiently. Water was hindered. Men cleared the hindrance. The level answered in its own slow time. And as midday arrives with the smell of lunch tins, coal smoke, and damp wool, we follow the ELY Fen Drain Gauger toward a sheltered place on the bank, where work pauses just long enough for food, thought, and the soft company of the landscape. You choose a place out of the wind, perhaps beside a willow whose roots grip the bank like old hands. The grass is damp but not soaked, and a flattened sack or folded coat edge can make a seat if needed. You sit carefully, because the body knows by now which joints are tired. The drain passes below with a low sound that feels almost domestic after a morning of walking. Lunch is simple: bread, cheese, perhaps an apple, perhaps cold bacon if the household had some to spare. The bread has taken the shape of its wrapping, and the cheese is firm with the cool of the satchel. You eat slowly. The first bite tastes of salt, grain, and outdoor hunger. A crumb falls onto your coat and is brushed away without thought. You drink tea from a bottle or flask if you have one. It may be lukewarm by now, tannic and strong, with a trace of metal from the container. It is still welcome. Heat is not only temperature when you have been standing in fen wind. It is comfort, pause, and a small proof that someone prepared for the day before the day began. From where you sit, you can see the long, level land around Ely. The fields are not empty. They are resting between tasks, or holding growth too small to be dramatic. A distant cart moves along a road so straight it seems drawn with a ruler. Smoke lifts from a cottage chimney, then is bent sideways by the wind. The cathedral may stand faintly beyond it all, patient and pale. A drain gauger's lunch hour is not always a full hour. It bends around weather, distance, and need. Still, even a short pause has value. You loosen your shoulders, you flex cold fingers, you look back over the morning's entries and forward toward the route remaining. The notebook lies on your knee, closed for once, and the pencil rests beside it like a tool allowed to breathe. You may notice small things when the body is still: a beetle moving through grass stems, the clean-cut end of a reed where someone trimmed it days ago, a feather caught in a thorn, the way the current touches the bank, draws away and returns, making a soft repeated kiss against the mud. Such details are not in the report, but they are part of being present. There is no need to turn them into poetry aloud. The job itself is plain enough to hold them. You can be a practical man and still know that the afternoon light on brown water has a quiet beauty. You can measure a drain and still feel the calm of its steady passing. The fen does not require you to choose between usefulness and wonder. A passerby may come along the bank while you eat. Perhaps an older woman taking the path between cottages. Her boots tied firmly. Her shawl close around her shoulders. She asks if the bridge ahead is muddy. You tell her where to step. She thanks you and goes on. Careful but unafraid. People who live in wet country learn how to walk. When she is gone, the quiet returns. You wrap the remaining food, if any, and brush crumbs from your hands. The paper crackles softly. You stand, feeling the legs resist for a moment after rest, then agree to work again. The satchel goes over the shoulder. The notebook returns to its place. The afternoon opens. The first steps after lunch are always slower. Digestion and damp air make the body want softness, but the route resumes its claim. You pass the willow, the side ditch, the place where the bank dips, and the post where a scrap of old rope has been tied for months. Familiarity gathers around you like another layer of clothing, and as the afternoon stretches across the flat land, we move with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger toward the office duties that wait beyond the field path, where outdoor facts must be made clear enough for other hands to trust. The office may be a small room near a yard, or part of a larger drainage board building, depending on the district and the day. It does not need to be impressive. It needs a desk, ledgers, maps, chairs, shelves, and enough heat to keep ink usable in winter. The door may have mud scuffed into its lower panels from men who come in directly from the banks. The floor accepts this as part of its work. When you enter, the smell changes at once. Outside is reed, water, smoke, and soil. Inside is paper, dust, ink, coal, damp wool, and the faint sourness of boots drying badly near heat. Your ears adjust too. Wind and water drop away. In their place come pen scratches, chair legs, a kettle settling, and perhaps the slow tick of a clock. You take off your cap. This is not ceremony so much as habit and comfort. The scalp cools where the cap has held warmth. A clerk may look up and nod. He knows the satchel, the boots, the slightly reddened hands. He knows that whatever is in your notebook began at a real bridge or sluice, not as an abstraction. That gives the pages weight before they are opened. The day's entries must be transferred or reported. You sit or stand if the chair is taken, and open the notebook flat. Damp pages resist lying smooth. You may place one hand on the corner while writing with the other. The figures go into the ledger, each under its proper heading. Date, time, place, level, remarks. A simple order, repeated for years. The handwriting in the ledger is slower than in the field. There is no rain falling on it, no wind tugging the page, no need to balance on a muddy slope. You can form each word more carefully. Still, the field remains in the hand. A note about weed carries the smell of weed. A note about the soft bank carries the feel of your heel pressing into wet earth. Sometimes the clerk asks for clarification. Which culvert was that? The one near the drove or the one by the willow bend? You answer without impatience, because place names can tangle. Local speech and official records do not always match. A man may call a bridge by the farm near it, while a map calls it by a road, and an older ledger by a parish boundary. Part of the job is translating the landscape into shared understanding. The map is unrolled or unfolded, its paper creased along familiar lines. You stand over it together, your finger following the drain from one mark to another. On the map, the distances look obedient. In the legs, they are longer. You know the mud between those ink lines. You know the gates, the loose plank, the dog that barks at the bend. The map is necessary, but it is never complete. A foreman may come in while you are there. His boots are heavier than yours, perhaps, and his coat has the smell of manual work and tobacco. He listens to the note about the weed crew and the bank repair. He may ask whether another man is needed there tomorrow or whether it can wait. Your answer should be modest and accurate. You saw what you saw. You do not pretend to more. There is a quiet ethics to such reporting. Exaggeration wastes labor. Understatement risks trouble. Vagueness sends men to the wrong place. So you choose words carefully, not fancy words, but exact ones. Slight seepage, heavy weed, bank soft but holding, culvert clear after removal of debris. These phrases may sound plain, yet they guide the day's work. The office clock continues. Its face may be yellowed, its tick irregular, but it marks the turning from outside duty to administrative care. You feel the difference in your back. At the desk, tiredness gathers between the shoulders. On the bank, it lived more in the legs. Each kind of work asks the body for something different. Tea may appear. It is often strong and hot enough to fog the spectacles of the man who leans over it. You hold the cup and feel warmth enter the palms. The tea tastes slightly of the office, because cups stored near paper and coal always seem to carry a trace of both. It is welcome all the same. Work is held together by such small restorations. While you drink, talk may move to the weather. It always returns there. Someone has heard rain is coming from the west. Someone else distrusts the forecast. Another man judges by the wind, the birds, or a pain in his shoulder. You listen, because none of these ways of knowing is entirely useless. The Fen gathers information from instruments, skies, bones, and habit. Your own evidence is in the ledger. Levels here, falling. There, steady. At the sluice, passing well. Near the pump, perhaps a little high. You do not argue with the weather before it arrives. You only leave the record in order, so tomorrow's weather can be compared with today's ground. That is enough. When the entries are finished, the notebook closes with a soft slap. The ledger remains open for drying if ink has been used. A blotter takes the shine from fresh lines. The map is folded back along its worn creases. Chairs scrape. Someone reaches for a coat. The office releases you, but not entirely. Its order travels with you back into the field. And when the records have been made, we return again with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger to the open air, where the afternoon has cooled, and the drains wait without concern for how neatly they have been written down. The first breath outside feels larger after the office. It carries coal smoke from chimneys, dampness from the drains, and the faint animal warmth of a nearby stable or yard. You put your cap back on and step down from the threshold, watching for the puddle that always gathers by the worn stone. The body straightens under the sky. The day is not over. Your route now may be shorter, perhaps only a check on a place noted earlier, or a final reading near the pump. The bicycle takes you part of the way. Its wheels hiss over wet grit and click over small stones. Wind presses gently at your side, and the satchel shifts as you pedal. A road this flat can feel endless if the mind is restless, but today the rhythm carries you. A narrow drove road leads between fields. In summer it may be dusty, but now it is damp and marked with cart tracks. Water sits in the ruts, reflecting a pale strip of sky. You steer between them where you can. The tires leave their own brief lines in the mud, soon to be softened by another wheel, another boot, another shower. You pass a man repairing a fence. He has a hammer, a coil of wire, and a bundle of stakes. The hammer taps carry across the field in clear, spaced notes. He lifts a hand in greeting, and you nod back. His work keeps animals in their place. Yours keeps water in its place. The thought is simple, and it pleases you in a quiet way. At the pump, the engine is not running hard now, perhaps only standing ready, or moving at an easier rate. The building has a settled look in the afternoon light. Brick walls hold damp stains near the base. A drain or channel leads toward it with the purposeful straightness of engineered water. Oil marks the doorway where many boots have passed. You step inside if needed. The air is warmer and smells of metal, oil, and old heat. The engine man may be cleaning a part, checking a belt, or making an entry in his own record. His hands are dark around the nails, no matter how often they are washed. You exchange the few words required. The pump ran well. The level is easing. There may be rain later. Machinery has a different kind of calm from water. Water moves by fall, pressure, wind, and channel. Machinery moves by made parts agreeing with one another for as long as care allows. When it is still, it seems to hold its breath. When it runs smoothly, it has a confidence that can soothe the nerves, provided nothing in its rhythm is wrong. You look at the gauge near the pump. This reading matters because it connects the broader system to the lifting or discharge of water. The board may be stained darker than others, and the water beside it may be more disturbed, depending on the pump's operation. You wait, read, and record. The number joins the day's other numbers, completing another small part of the pattern. Outside the pumping station, the wind has turned. You smell rain somewhere beyond sight. It is a damp metal smell in the air, mixed with earth already preparing to receive it. Clouds gather low in the west. The light loses its yellow edge. You know this change without needing anyone to tell you, and it adjusts the rest of the day in your mind. You check the vulnerable place once more before heading back. The bank remains sound enough. The repaired clay has darkened but not slumped. A little water has gathered in hoof prints near the top, but not where it would worry you. You mark nothing dramatic, only a plain note that the repair is holding. Plain notes are often the best kind. The rain begins as a fine touch on the face, not even drops at first, more a mist with intention. It darkens the shoulders of your coat. It speckles the notebook cover before you tuck it away. Reeds along the drain nod under it. The water surface takes on a fine stippling, each tiny mark appearing and vanishing faster than thought. You start back with the bicycle beside you, because the path is too slick to ride safely at first. The handlebar is cold in your hand. Mud gathers at the wheels. Your boots slide once, then recover. The rain steadies but gently. There is no rush in it yet, only the sense of evening closing damply over the fields. A train sounds somewhere toward Ely, low and brief. The note travels through the wet air and disappears. You imagine passengers behind steamed windows, unaware of the gauge boards, the weed heaps, the soft bank, and the pump notes that have filled your day. That is all right. Not every useful thing needs to be known by everyone. Some work exists, so others need not think about it constantly. Still, you know it. You know the district as a set of responsibilities laid quietly over the land. This bridge, that sluice, the culvert near the willow, the bank by the low field, the pump, the office ledger. Each place has entered you through routine. You could walk much of it in thought, even with your eyes closed beside the fire. And as the rain gathers softly at your back, we stay with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger while the working day folds toward evening, not finished sharply, but closing by degrees like a gate drawn carefully against the wind. The village appears slowly, first as smoke, then roofs, then windows blurred by rain. Mud thickens near the road edges where carts have cut into the surface. A dog watches you from beneath a gate and does not bark, perhaps too damp to trouble itself. Somewhere, a woman calls a name from a doorway. The sound is softened by weather and distance, and the answer is lost. You pass the shop, its window dim with goods and reflection. A lamp has been lit inside, yellow against the grey afternoon. For a moment you see yourself faintly in the glass, cap low, shoulders wet, satchel dark, boots carrying half the bank with them. The reflection is not flattering and not unkind. It is simply accurate. At the office, if you return there once more, you bring the final note before rain becomes heavier. The clerk may still be present, or the foreman, or no one at all but the ledger waiting under a closed cover. You leave the report in the proper place, or speak it to the proper ear. The repaired bank is holding, the pump reading is easing, rain has begun. Those words are enough. They do not need decoration. The people who receive them know their use. Perhaps someone will decide to check later. Perhaps tomorrow's first round will be altered. Perhaps nothing more is needed unless the rain strengthens. Work often ends in such conditional calm, with the system watched but not disturbed. If you go straight home, the report waits until morning unless the matter requires immediate telling. Judgment enters there too. A man who sends every small thing as urgent will soon be poorly heard. A man who holds back too much may cause trouble. The gauger's craft includes knowing the weight of a message, not only the level of the water. Home is close enough now that the body anticipates it. Your hands want warmth before your mind admits it. Your shoulders want the satchel removed. Your feet want dry socks. The rain runs from your cap brim in small threads. You wipe your face with the back of a glove and taste faint salt, wool, and weather. Inside, the room takes you in. The sound of rain moves to the roof and window, no longer on your face. Firelight or lamplight changes the color of everything. The coat comes off heavily. The boots are left where they can do the least harm. Steam may lift from the damp wool near the hearth, carrying the smell of the day into the house. You do not become a different person indoors. The drain is still in your thoughts, but it loosens. You answer a question, eat what is set before you, and warm the fingers that have been curled around pencil, handlebar, rail, and notebook. The household sounds are close and layered, spoon against cup, chair against floor, rain at the glass, breath settling after work. Later, when the rain continues, you may step to the door and listen. A gauger listens differently from another man. You think of catchments, ditches, boards, and the low places where water arrives first. You picture the repaired bank under rain. You picture the cleared weed stretch, taking flow more freely than it would have last week. The thought is practical, not restless. The night does not require you yet, so you close the door. The lamp burns steadily. Your notebook rests where it can be found in darkness if needed, but for now it remains closed. The rain speaks outside in one long soft sentence across roof, road, field, ditch, and drain. Morning comes with the rain stopped, and we go again with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger into the washed brightness after weather, where every surface seems newly marked and the water has written its own report before the pencil begins. The first thing you notice is the smell. Fresh rain on peat has a dark sweetness, almost like cold tea and earth mixed together. The road smells of wet dust turned to paste. Grass smells sharper. Wooden gates smell awake. Your boots meet softened ground at once, and the mud grips with a slow insistence that tells you the day will be heavy in the legs. At the nearest ditch, water runs clearer than expected, quick over the small stones and brick at the entry. That is a good sign. Not a complete sign, but good. You watch it for a few breaths, then move on. The sky has opened into a thin blue, and sunlight strikes the wet reed stems until they shine like dull brass. The main gauge has risen, as expected. You read it carefully, keeping your shadow off the board. The water moves with a stronger pull, not wild, only purposeful. It carries leaf fragments, straw, a thin line of foam, and a broken twig turning end over end. You write the level and compare it with the last rain. The difference is useful, and you hold it in mind. Further along, the cleared weed section shows its worth. The water passes cleanly through, faster than it would have before. The heaps of cut weed on the bank have darkened and settled, no longer glossy but still wet beneath their surface. They smell stronger now, warmed a little by the returning sun. You step around them and read the downstream board. A maintenance man may be there, checking his own work with quiet satisfaction. He says it runs better now. You agree, and the agreement is not idle. Both of you can see the current's line, the lower standing water along the bank, and the cleaner sound near the bend. He leans on his tool for a moment. You put the figure in the book. The repaired bank holds, though rainwater has marked it with fine lines. You crouch and look closely. The fresh clay has settled but not opened. Grass at the edge is muddy from boots, and a stake has been driven where the slope needed support. You press gently with your heel. It resists. The report will say sound after rain, and that phrase will carry a whole inspection inside it. This is the part of the job that feels most like a conversation. The fen asks a question through rain, the drains answer through levels, the workers answer through maintenance. You answer through observation and record. None of it is dramatic when it works, and that is precisely the point. A good drainage day may look uneventful to anyone passing by. By mid-morning, sun and wind begin to dry the top of the banks. Steam does not rise visibly, but the smell changes as surfaces warm. Mud turns from slick black to dull brown. Grass lifts a little. The road sheds shine from its puddles. You feel the day easing, not into idleness, but into a manageable rhythm. The notebook grows full of calm confirmations. At a road bridge, you meet the same boy who once asked what the numbers mean. He has a stick in hand and a school bag over one shoulder. He peers down at the board and guesses the level, badly but with effort. You correct him gently, showing where the water actually cuts the mark. He frowns in concentration, then nods as if admitted to a small secret. You tell him that the board must be read straight on when possible, because an angle can mislead the eye. You show him how ripples make the line seem higher or lower. He watches the water, then the board, then your pencil. Perhaps he will forget by supper. Perhaps he will remember years later whenever he crosses a bridge. Either outcome is enough. Children in working places often learn by standing near adults who are not trying to teach grand lessons. A hand on a gate, a warning about soft ground, a demonstration of how to read a mark. These things sink in quietly. The Fen passes knowledge this way, through little practical inheritances. You go on, and the boy remains leaning over the bridge until some other duty calls him away. The day's later readings confirm the pattern. Higher after rain but moving, no new obstruction, pump effective, bank holding. These phrases, repeated across the route, bring a sense of steadiness that is physical as much as mental. Your shoulders settle. Your stride lengthens a little. The Fen has not become easy, but it has become understandable for today. And as the sun climbs higher and the wet fields shine under a clearing sky, we remain with the ELY Fen Drain Gauger in the middle of his round, where the work turns from immediate response back toward the patient keeping of ordinary order. The last light rests low on the ELY Fen, and the drain beside you has taken on the color of pewter. You make the final reading without hurry, waiting for the little wind-made tremble to pass from the water's edge. The board is damp under your glove. The pencil is blunt now, and the notebook closes with the soft weight of a day properly kept. You stand for a moment on the bank, not because there is more to do, but because leaving is also part of the work. The fields lie quiet beyond the ditch, dark soil cooling under the evening air. A cart turns toward a farmyard. Smoke lifts from a cottage chimney and drifts sideways across the flat land. Somewhere near Ely, a bell marks the hour with a sound softened by distance. The drain keeps moving after you turn away. It slips under bridges, past reeds, through sluices, and toward the patient engines that wait when they are needed. You do not need to follow it now. Today's figures have been written. The soft bank has been seen. The clear flow has been trusted. The tools have done what tools can do. At home, the boots are set by the door, dark with fen mud at the soles. The coat hangs heavy on its peg, carrying the smell of rain, smoke, reed, and cold water. The notebook is placed where morning will find it, closed and quiet, its pages holding only enough of the day. Outside, the low country settles into dusk. The gauge boards stand pale in the dimness. The reeds lean together. The water passes in its narrow channels with no need for praise, and the fields rest behind their banks, held by ordinary care. The room is quiet now. The lamp is turned low. The tools are where they belong, and so are you.